We're going to let you in on the secret sauce to the success of Interflame Finance portfolios. In this video, we're going to explain how we evaluate growth metrics and how we value growth companies. All that we ask for in exchange is that you like this video. That really helps out our channel, that you subscribe to the channel, and that you hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. So we have a lot of different metrics that we look at when it comes to growth, but the five main ones are the PEG ratio, the forward PE, the revenue growth, the EPS growth, and the return on equity and invested capital. So we have five different metrics that all ask one question: is the growth of this company real, and is it worth what we're paying for it? We're going to look at the PEG ratio and the forward PE, the 5-year estimated revenue growth and EPS growth, as well as the return on equity and invested capital. Let's break these down one at a time. The PEG ratio, what is that asking? It's asking, are we overpaying for the growth that we're getting in this company? Next is the forward PE. That is the PE ratio based on what the market is pricing in for next year's earnings. Now, while we cannot peer into a crystal ball and we cannot see exactly what's going to happen in the future, we can use analyst expectations and our own expectations to figure out what is the revenue growth, and that is a 5-year estimate annualized. We do the same thing for the bottom line, the EPS growth, 5-year estimate. We like revenue, we like profit, we like earnings, but we want to make sure that not only are we making money, but we are actually making money faster and faster. And finally, return on equity and invested capital is basically asking how efficiently and how effectively does the company turn capital into profit. So let's start with the PEG ratio. Like I said earlier, the PEG ratio is the PE ratio divided by the expected earnings per share growth rate. So the key word there is expected. We cannot predict the future. We don't know what the actual EPS growth is going to be. So we use our best guess and our best estimation. Oftentimes we want to sort of lowball it and undershoot it and be a little bit more conservative just to be cautious. Now the regular PE ratio tells you how much you're paying for $1 of earnings, but it says nothing about how fast those earnings are growing. The PEG ratio fixes that by dividing the PE ratio by the company's expected growth rate, putting the price and growth on the same scale. So one thing that we pay attention to on this channel, this rule of thumb, is that it really varies by sector. A below 1.0 may signal undervaluation relative to growth. Near 1.0 is considered fair. Above 1.0 may signal that you're overpaying for that growth. Like we say on this channel, 2 is pretty good, but we like it to be 1 and under. So why do we focus on the PEG ratio when it comes to growth? Well, a stock can look cheap, it can look undervalued on a PE basis alone, but it can still be expensive once you account for how it's actually growing. So let's look at an example in practice. If we were to only look at these two companies, Company A and Company B, on a PE basis, it looks like Company B is the better buy. Remember, we like low PE ratios. So Company A trading at 35 times earnings, Company B trading at 18 times. So on that surface level, we would purchase Company B. However, when we take the EPS growth into account and we expect, and keyword there is expect, Company A to grow 35%, in the next year, Company B only 6%, we take that PE ratio of each company, divide that by the EPS growth. So for Company A, it's 35 times divided by 35%. That's a 1.0 PEG ratio. In Company B, yeah, you're getting it at 18 times earnings, but when you divide that by their measly 6% growth rate, you're getting a PEG ratio of 3. So the key takeaway here is that Company B looks cheaper on a PE basis alone, but the PEG ratio is triple that of Company A's. So if we adjust for growth, which is what the PEG ratio does, B is actually the more expensive stock. The second growth metric that we really pay attention to is the forward PE. How do you compute the forward PE? Well, you take the share price and you divide that by the estimated earnings per share in the next 12 months. So the trailing PE is a backward-looking metric. It uses the earnings that the company has already reported. The forward PE looks ahead using analyst expectations and estimate of next year's earnings. And again, it's looking into the future. It's expecting certain amounts of growth. We typically like to be a little conservative and cautious on this channel and not go too crazy. So growth investing is really a bet on the future earnings power. So the forward number often matters more than the trailing one. However, that forward PE is only as good as the estimate behind it. Analyst forecasts can sometimes and very often be way too optimistic, so it's a guide, not a guarantee. So why do we use the forward PE? It shows what the market is pricing in for next year, not just what already happened. A forward-looking lens on a forward-looking style of investing. We're hopeful, we're optimistic, we want to bake in the growth that we're expecting for the next year, but we don't want to be too optimistic, get our hopes up, and only to be let down in our portfolios in the future. So just a quick example. So the share price of a stock, let's say, is $50 per share. Let's say the trailing EPS is $2 even. So we take that $50 price, we divide it by $2 of earnings per share, and we get a PE multiple of 25. Now, if we take that growth rate and we expect them to actually increase more into the future, then we're going to take $50 per share and divide that by $2.50. That's what we expect them to earn next year. So that gives a new forward PE of 20 times earnings. So the key takeaway here is that the forward multiple is lower than that of the trailing one. The market expects earnings to grow effectively discounting the stock as profits catch up. So the way that we like to think about this is, yeah, we're buying it for 25 times current earnings, but if we bought this company at $50 right now, we'd actually be getting it at a 20 multiple, a lower multiple, a cheaper price based on next year's expected earnings. Now, one of the most important metrics that we consider at Interflame Finance is the expected annualized revenue growth, and that's on a 5-year basis. So it measures the average yearly rate that analysts expect total sales or revenue to grow over the next 5 years. So revenue is the top line number. It's the total amount of money flowing into the business before any costs are subtracted. Because revenue is harder to manipulate with accounting practices and choices than profit, it's one of the most honest signals of real demand for a company's products or services. But not all numbers are the same. The context matters. A 12% growth rate is not really that great in a fast-moving industry, but it's really, really good in a slow, mature one. We typically like to compare annualized revenue growth expectations on sectors and industry norm. So why do we use the annualized revenue growth? Well, profit growth built on shrinking or stagnant revenue rarely lasts. Healthy, sustainable growth usually starts with a top line. Before moving on, we do want to point out that when we say 12% growth, that is annualized. So what we would say is that we're expecting 12% every single year for the next 5 years on average. That is not 12% over the course of the entire 5 years. So this is where the power of compounding really comes into play. So let's say that at year one, we have two companies and they're both earning $1 billion in revenue. One has 6% annual growth, the other has 18% annual growth. So that's 12 percentage points difference. It doesn't sound like too much, but the 6% grower in 5 years is going to be earning $1.34 billion in revenue. So they've increased about 34%. However, that 18% grower in just 5 years has more than doubled its annual revenue. As a matter of fact, it's basically double that of the other company. So 18% growth, you're going to be making $2.29 billion after 5 years. So the takeaway here is just a little tiny difference in the revenue growth. The expected compounding power can have huge implications in the future. Revenue and sales are top line, so expected annualized EPS growth is the bottom line. This measures the average yearly rate analysts expect earnings per share, EPS, to grow over the next 5 years. And again, this is another annualized metric. EPS growth is the bottom line. How much profit is left per share after all the costs and interest and taxes are paid? Earnings per share can actually grow faster than revenue for a lot of different reasons, improving profit margins, operating efficiency, or share buybacks that shrink the share count. EPS is something that can actually be manipulated by accounting practices. So it's not automatically good or bad. Margin expansion is healthy, but EPS growth driven mainly by heavy debt-funded buybacks deserves a closer look. So the reason why we use EPS growth here at Interflame Finance is that comparing EPS growth against the revenue growth that we just talked about reveals whether profitability gains are actually genuine and real or just borrowed from the future. So let's look at an example here. So we have two companies, Company A and Company B. For Company A, revenue and EPS actually grow in step. They're both growing 10% a year every single year. So profit growth matches sales growth. Company B, on the other hand, the EPS earnings per share is growing a lot faster than the revenue, likely due to margin gains or buybacks. This is something that we certainly take into consideration when we are analyzing different companies. So the key takeaway here is that Company B is not necessarily worse, but it does raise some red flags, and we do want to dig in a little bit deeper, look at their filings, look at their financial health, make sure that that is actually healthy margin expansion, not just unsustainable leverage. And finally, that brings us to return on equity and return on invested capital. So return on equity, ROE, is you take the net income and you divide that by the shareholders' equity into that company. So what this does is it measures the profit generated per dollar of shareholder equity, but debt can inflate it, and we'll see that in a little bit. The way that we compute the return on invested capital, the ROIC, is we compute the NOPAT, which stands for net operating profit after tax, and we divide that by the invested capital. And the invested capital is all the debt that it takes on plus all the shareholder equity. So return on invested capital measures the profit on all capital used, debt and equity alike, so leverage cannot distort it. Just some points worth mentioning: a company can actually boost its ROE simply by taking on more debt. No real improvement to the underlying business. So ROE can be manipulated just by borrowing a lot more money. ROIC, on the other hand, strips out that effect. It makes it the more reliable lens for comparing two companies with different capital structures. However, both of these metrics matter. Return on equity shows what shareholders themselves are earning. And as investors, potential investors into companies, that's actually very important because we will be holding these shares. Return on invested capital tells a slightly different story. It shows how efficient the business itself is, independent of financing choices. So on our channel, return on invested capital is one of the best single gauges of underlying business quality. It answers the question, how good is this company at turning capital into profit, regardless of how it's financed? So here we have two different companies. Company A has 35% return on equity. It looks very impressive. impressive, but it's a very debt-heavy company. That debt is doing most of the work. The return on invested capital of just 9% tells the real story. Company B does not have that impressive of a return on equity, just 16% compared to the 35% of Company A. That 14% return on invested capital is pretty close to that 16% return on equity, so that usually implies that there's low leverage. This is genuine operating profitability. So the key takeaway for these two numbers is that when return on equity and invested capital tell different stories, it's usually leverage, not the actual business quality, that helps explain that gap. Now remember, leverage is not always a bad thing. Sometimes you need to finance various projects, you need to borrow money in order to get your business going even faster and faster. So there's always more to the story. It's always worth digging into, and that's where understanding your businesses truly comes into play. So before we summarize, again, if you got anything out of this video, please consider liking it. That would really help out the channel. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a video when we actually put this into practice and score and evaluate your favorite companies. Hit that notification bell so you never miss one of our videos. You may even want to save this video and come back to it so you can always reference what we're talking about when we go through the growth scores that we compute here at Interflame Finance. So let's just summarize real quick. The PEG ratio, what that measures is the price of that company relative to its expected growth. The general rule of thumb is the lower the better. 1 and under is very, very nice to see. The forward PE, what that does is it looks at the price versus next year's estimated earnings. Again, that's just an estimate. We like when that is lower than the trailing PE. That means that we're buying it today at a discount relative to what the earnings should be next year. We like to look at the 5-year annualized expected revenue growth. That's top line sales expansion. We like when that number is high, and we like when that number is above the sector or the industry average. Earnings per share growth, also annualized over the next 5 years. That is that bottom line profit expansion. We like for that number to be as high as possible, and we like to make sure that there is a clear driver that is driving and pushing that EPS growth out. And finally, return on equity and invested capital. It's basically a measure of the efficiency of capital use. This is also something that, generally speaking, you want higher the better, with return on equity roughly that of invested capital, to make sure they're not taking on too much debt. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you got something out of this. Please subscribe, like, do all the good stuff, and we'll see you in the next video.